We talked a lot about token economics and economics design. The fact is that none of this is completely new. One of the most prominent applications is in video games and esports. It is where you have your own currency in a simulated economy. So now we're going to add some complexity into it, which is blockchain. And it's quite similar in a very general sense and general idea. The only difference is that it has more impact in real life because you have a secondary market, you allow for speculation, you allow for trading with real money. And this is on a larger scale, so it's slightly more different and difficult. So, in an attempt to simulate economy, we are also simulating its economics. There are plenty of people out there trying to make decisions and interacting on a very large scale. And we're trying to move these people and their behavior towards something. And that's what designers do. So the goal of economics design, or the goal of this, designing this simulated economy, is to build a stable and self-sustaining economy. And especially, it might be quite difficult to do that in the secondary market, but at least in the primary market, the rules that's put in place, the incentive mechanisms, the punishments that's put in place, just to allow, these people to make the right decisions and to interact properly for the benefit of the entire system. So this is the first episode in this podcast series called Economics Design. In this series, we're going to look at how to design a virtual economy. We're going to discuss some use cases, and we're going to have some interview sessions with the designers of these ecosystems and economies. And more generally, we want to chat about the economic design of digital ecosystems. And they are not just blockchain based, but they could be stuff like your frequent flyer points, your credit card points, video games, and anything that has got to do with using an incentive form of currency to incentivize people in this simulated economy. So in this first episode, we are going to talk about a video game. It's called Planet Zoo. And if you love to, build a world and then manage it and run it in a separate virtual or digital economy, you will love this game. So this game came out a few months ago by an English company or UK-based company called Frontier. And the game is very simple. As you can imagine, it's called Planet Zoo. You just build a zoo. You build a zoo. It's a management game of how to manage your money, how to manage your funds, and understand, what do customers want and buy the right animals for the customers. So this is a general idea, very simple. So in this episode, we're going to cover three main things. The first one is the economics design of Planet Zoo, how tokens are used, and the design philosophy behind all these tokens. The tokens are their in-game currency. The second thing is how game uses tokens to encourage players towards specific kind of behaviors. And the third one is the consequences of the design. The design, it's well designed, the general philosophy is good, but sometimes there's some unforeseeable consequences with all these designs. So we're going to discuss that later too. So the game works in a very, very simple way. You start the game, you're given limited cash and limited points called conservation credits, CC. And then with the cash, you use it to build the zoo. This is your infrastructure architecture layer of the zoo. And then with the CC, you buy animals with them. So you have two tokens, yeah? And then with that, you can get people to come in, and when people come in, you get more money, cash. So as you can imagine, this is a dual token economy. You have cash and then you have CC. And the fun thing about Frontier is that you can't buy any of these with money from an outside or from a secondary market. You can't trade it. You just got to keep earning. So bear that in mind. So the idea is quite simple. You start with very limited number of CC. And where can you use CC? You can only use CC to purchase animals. You can't buy CC. The only way to get CC is you purchase animals from a marketplace. Then you sell your whatever animals on the marketplace, and then you start saving up your CC, and then you buy more endangered species, and then you breed them, you sell them for more money and more CC, and whatever capitalist teaches you. With money or with cash, it's quite different. It's where you can get it when people donate to your zoo, when people have enter your zoo. You can even borrow money from the system itself, and then you have to pay back with interest and things like that. So you have two tokens, right? So with cash, it's in abundance. So you can just borrow it if you really need it. And with CC, it's rare. So you start with both a little amount of them. You try to maximize in whatever way you can. And the idea is that with the small amount of CC, you buy the cheaper animals in the marketplace, because the idea is that the marketplace, all the animals will be in CC, and then you price them in lower CC. So you buy the cheaper animals, you breed them, and then you sell them. You can either sell them to the game where you get CC, you get a fixed amount of CC, or you sell them in the marketplace where you can charge a little bit more. So and you accumulate CC, and then you breed more endangered animals. So that's the design philosophy behind this tokens and the difference between CC and cash. That's why they separate it. But reality is never really what we want, right? Reality is quite different from the idea. So in reality, it's very easy to make cash, because if you don't have it, you can just go and borrow it. But it's very difficult to get CC. So what does that mean? That means that CC, there's a premium to CC right now. And that means it's very tough to get, when it's very tough to get CC, people demand it more. So now because how can you get CC? You get CC when you sell animals on the marketplace. And so what people do now is that even for the very cheap animals, they price it very high, premium CC, because CC has a premium right now. So they put a high amount of CC just for the cheap animals. The goal was for the cheap animals to get very low CC, and then the endangered animals for high CC. But because there's a premium to want to have more CC, all the cheap animals have a premium, it becomes inflated, everything becomes very expensive on CC, and then the endangered animals, no one can buy them because it's just way too expensive. So this continues, and now a lot of zoos have problems because they don't have money, they don't have enough CC to buy the animals. So the outcome is that CC has a very high premium. Early users are hoarding animals, so they're mass breeding very special animals, endangered animals, and then selling them for a very high price. And only the other early members get to trade them, because they join early, and then they play early, they accumulated early. All the other newcomers, they can't afford anything because it's just way too expensive. They don't have any CC. And it's also possible for the marketplace to have cash, like to price animals in cash. But people don't want to do that because it's easy to get cash. The premium or the scarce resource is CC. So people are trying their best to get more CC. And so there's a huge problem in the infrastructure of the game. And the game developers understand that. They try to make some changes to that, and I would call that a fiscal stimulus. So what the game does is they try to pump in animals into the marketplace for cash or for very low CC so that new users can afford to buy. But the thing is, there's so much demand for animals, and there's only so many that the developers themselves can produce. So there's a huge problem with that. A lot of people can't afford to buy the animals, they can't play the game. And that's what causing a lot of argument and dissatisfaction by the players, because they have CC but they just can't play the game. So now that's the general idea of how the game is being designed, how tokens are being used, how tokens are supposed to encourage different behaviors. And now we go a little bit more into understanding the mechanisms behind this entire system. Alright. So now we're going to move on to understanding the mechanism design of the game, and then to understand the outcome as well as what went wrong. So mechanism design, talked about this many times, and mechanism design is really just the rules of the game. So if we want to encourage specific behaviors in people or in these players of the game, then we need to embed different kind of rules, can be in code or can be in whatever form of rules, and to encourage them to move towards these behaviors or to exhibit these behaviors. They're usually called rules, and we just call them mechanism design. In mechanism design, in the framework that I've built, mechanism design has three different aspects, or three big variables to consider. The first one is governance. So in governance, we want to understand how decision making is being made, and when there is a problem coming up, how is it going to be resolved? The second is non-financial incentives. So this could be stuff like reputation, which is super popular, and almost every project or every online simulated economy or simulated system has a form of reputation in one form or another. And then we also have allocation. So how do you allocate different resources as one of this incentive, right? And the third one is structure. So in structure, we are going to look at the bargaining process. How do you structure that? So that could be your pricing model. That could be how buyers and sellers agree on the price. Bargaining. Done. And we also have community information. So I put community information in because it's usually a simulated economy. It can also be linked to something in real life. So you need to get information from in real life and to embed it into your system. So that could be community information, or that could be any way to mitigate between this virtual simulated world and the real world that we live in. So based on these three big variables, we're going to look deeper and to understand what's the mechanism design behind Planet Zoo. So for governance, let's start with decision making. So decision making is limited, and decision making in Planet Zoo is where you have limits as well as rules by code in the system. So this could be stuff like when you're constructing a zoo and you can't construct like one of the areas for a giraffe to be just one square tile big, because it's just not possible, it's not realistic, and there's some rules in place that is embedded in code. So they come in alerts forms. So stuff like, this is too small, you can put your giraffe there, so you just redesign your zoo to make sure that it can fit a giraffe. The other thing when it comes to, so decision making is on a primary level or like on a higher level where you want to understand how things work. The other thing is resolution. What happens when things shit happens? How do you resolve that? So one of the things that Planet Zoo does is to reduce the need for resolution to happen, right? So before things happen, you want to have prevention, because prevention is better than cure. So for prevention, they have relentless positive messages trying to encourage good behaviors, like some tips or some ideas that keeps popping up with positive messages, like having a theme-based zoo makes it better or makes it more attractive to guests and zoo goers to come and visit your zoo. So it gives you some idea and trying to encourage good behaviors and not create a huge mess. Another thing with resolution is that the system actually crashes if you try to do, if you try to mess things up too much. So for example, if you try to put a giraffe on top of a giraffe by having a very small enclosure for giraffes, and then you buy like 200 giraffes and try to put them all in this little corner, and the giraffe starts to deform and become one giraffe when you have like 10 giraffes becoming one giraffe. So you have this giraffe with heads popping up everywhere. So that's when the system starts to glitch, and then it deletes everything. So it crashes. So I guess in a way that is one of the resolution, where you just can't play anymore. It restarts, it crashes, and then you have to play again. So that's governance in the form of code. With non-financial incentives, we have reputation and allocation. Reputation comes in two forms in Planet Zoo. First, you have the different reputation elements, and then you have protesters. So you can imagine protesters, not a good thing. So for the elements, there are a lot of different criteria and factors that adds up to a person's or a player's reputation score. The first one will be, because it's a Planet Zoo, everything is about animals, right? So the number of animals, the variety of animals, the welfare of animals. So there's a score that tracks, because everything is simulated and it's digital, so there's a score that tracks the happiness of all the animals, depending on how frequent you feed them, what kind of things they're being exposed to. The animals can be happy, sad, or neutral. And by having happier animals, more variety of animals, more number of animals, you get higher scores, higher reputation scores. The second is a conservation rating. So remember I said that there are two ways to get CC. The first one is to sell it on the marketplace, and any user, any player can buy. The other one is to sell it back to the game. To sell it back to the game, they call it releasing back to the wild, which means that theoretically you're supposed to get the animals, you rehabilitate them, you take care of them. Once they're ready, you send them out to the Amazon forest or to whatever wilderness, and they go and live their life. So that's sending back to the wild. There isn't this part isn't added into Planet Zoo itself. So they just sell it back to the game, and the game helps you to give it to the wild and allow all these animals to roam freely. So this is conservation rating. So you get more CC when you sell it in the marketplace, because as I mentioned before, CC has a premium. You can sell random animals for a very high CC because CC is just rare, and so you have an incentive to do that. And more people will want to sell it on the marketplace, which is good because they get more CC, and when they get more CC, they can buy more endangered animals. At the same time, the game developers don't want you to just crop the game with too many animals in the marketplace. They also want people to breed animals and then sell them and then release them to the wild where you get some CC. So now there's a trade-off, right? You can increase your reputation score by increasing your conservation rating by releasing animals back to the wild. Or what you can also do is to put the animal on the marketplace, have more CC to get more wild animals or more endangered animals, but your reputation score decreases. So it really depends on how you want to play the game. What are you trying to maximize? Are you trying to maximize the best zoo for a lot of animals, or are you trying to maximize for the best reputation score so that more people can come to your zoo and then have more cash? Depends on what you want to maximize. These are the different ways to play the game. The third score is education. So in real life, one of the biggest reasons for having zoos is to also educate people about conservation efforts, about educating them about animals, and just understanding a little bit more about animals. I love the zoo, by the way. So if you have a lot of billboards or encyclopedias around and all this kind of stuff where you have to purchase, you have to purchase with money, then it increases the education possibility, the probability of zoo goers or guests being educated. And then it increases your reputation score because a zoo that educates people about animals and knowledge usually has a better score. So that's the third one. The fourth one is guest happiness. So at the end of the day, zoo is an institution, right? It's a business. You want to make money, and you make money when your guests are happy. When your guests are happy, they come back often. They tell people about them. The amount of people that comes in increases. That increases your reputation as well. So guest happiness is a factor. We'll understand a little bit about guest happiness later. And lastly is marketing campaigns. So depending on how good your marketing campaign is, and then it also increases your reputation score. Now, these are the 5 factors that are 5 elements that help you to increase in reputation score. Then I also talked about protesters, right? This game is quite fun because these 5 elements help you to increase in reputation score. But how do you decrease? How do you punish bad behaviors? You have protesters. Now, protesters, initially they act like usual zoo goers, like guests. They come into the zoo and they realize that you're not a good zookeeper, or you're not a good manager of a zoo. So for example, as I mentioned, you have a small enclosure with a giraffe that they're all super squeezed together, or you're not feeding them enough, or you have very little animals. And protesters typically come in to protest all these bad behaviors. And the thing is, they cannot be removed. So they come in as guests and they just stay there. They will be protesting all along. They'll be blocking everywhere. They want you to change something. Your reputation score also goes down because it's a form of punishment. Not only your reputation score goes down, it also causes other guests to leave. So you lose your cash, possibility of getting more cash. So that reduces your reputation score, and it's a disincentive. And then we talk about allocation. With allocation, you allocate. What are we allocating? Remember, we have 2 types of tokens in the system. We have cash and we have CC. With CC, you're only allocated when you sell animals, so we can't really talk about that. We'll talk about that later, but that's not something the game allocates. What the game allocates is cash. Cash by how many people coming in, by how frequent the game allocates guests coming to your zoo. So with that is related to reputation that we talked about before. So when you have higher reputation, then you have more allocation of guests and zoo goers. The second thing, the zoo goers or the guests also have rules embedded in them by code. So for example, we talked about animal welfare. So if your animals are well fed, they look happy, they're fat, they're not like skinny and trying to die or going to die, then you're allocated more guests because you're taking care of your zoo. Also stuff like if the queue is too long, if the walkway is too long, then you have less guests. Or if the queue is too long but you have food stands around, so you make guests happier, then you have more allocation of guests coming in, kind of like word of mouth in a way. But at the end of the day, all these are coded behavioral preferences. So these are preferences that people in general love, rational preferences, and then it's just being coded into the behaviors of these guests, and then they'll be allocated to your zoo. And what does that mean? That means you have more people coming in and then you can collect more entrance fees. The other thing also is that they get to donate. So you get extra bonus, like bonus cash, if you're taking care of your animals. So if the status of the animals, the welfare of the animals is very high, it's good in two ways. First, it increases your reputation score, which increases allocation, and then it does a whole chain effect of getting more people in. You get more entry ticket fees and everything. The second thing is that when the guests see that animals are well taken care of, they actually donate a little bit more. So you get extra cash. So all these are non-financial. There are non-financial incentives because these are actually rules embedded into the code, into the game. So the financial incentive itself is the allocation of these cash or donation or whatever, but that's a secondary topic. What we're talking about is the rules. How are they being allocated? When do they give you more cash? How does it affect your reputation score, and all these kind of rules. And lastly, it's the structure. So let's talk about bargaining. It's a little bit more. You don't have that much flexibility to affect pricing in a very big scale of Planet Zoo, but you have a huge flexibility to organize bargaining in your zoo itself. So for example, when you can set dynamic prices by the player itself. If I'm a player, then I can set prices any amount that I want. So for example, if I'm selling umbrellas at, I don't know, $5 and it starts to rain, then I can charge higher prices for the umbrellas because people will naturally demand more umbrellas. And the weather is not controlled by the player, but the weather is controlled by the game itself. It's all in code. So this bargaining, you don't have bargaining as in, the guests have to bargain directly with the player, but the player gets to set dynamic prices and then guests just have to follow. If it's too expensive, because of this coded behavioral preference, maybe the guests will not buy, but you have to find the right amount where the guests will buy, and then it gives you a huge margin as well. And for community information, because this game is not it's not really affecting the real life world, the world that we're living in right now. So you don't have oracles that takes in information from the outside world, but what you have is automated bust and boom cycles. Just like the economy, it contracts, it expands, and I guess right now we're ongoing to recession period soon, to contracting. But in the game, you have this bust and boom cycles a little bit more often and frequent because the game is running at a very fast speed. So these stuff is not, you don't control it based on the real world. That's whatever news is happening right now. They could, but the time period in the game is a lot faster than in real life. So all these are governed by code. So you wouldn't know when, but the code will tell you, okay, this is the bust cycle, this is the boom cycle, and you just have to organize accordingly. So like drop your prices, drop your entry prices, drop your ticket prices, buy less animals in that period, or try to do more marketing campaign to get people and all that kind of stuff. So that's the general idea of the mechanism design of Planet Zoo. Now, the more important thing that we want to talk about is the outcome. So remember I said we're going to talk about CC later. We're going to talk about them right now. CC is the conservation credits, which is you can only get them when you trade animals. And there are two ways to get them. One is you sell animals on the marketplace, and the other one is you release animals back to the wild, which is selling the animals back to the game, and the game will give you some CC. Obviously, when you sell it back to the game, you get less CC. When you sell it to the marketplace, you get more CC. We talked about that just now as well. Get more CC because there's a premium on CC. That's the only way to get CC. So CC is like super scarce. everybody wants to get more CC, so they just put the price really, really high. And what happens? The first two outcomes, right? The first outcome is that prices are super high. Everything is priced in CC, and because the CC has a premium, everyone wants to get more CC. Everything is super expensive, and there's no option to buy fairly priced animals. The second is that because there are no ways to buy fairly priced animals, in the end you only have 3 animals that is in the whole planet zoo. It's the warthog, the ostrich, and the Indian peafowl. Why? Because these animals they breed very easily, so you can buy them cheaply. They breed very easily. You sell them back on the marketplace, and then you try to get more of the animals going, right? And what you try to do is you buy a pair of ostrich maybe, you breed them, and then you sell them on the marketplace. You collect more CC. You buy other animals. So that's the outcome right now. Now, this is where failure exists, okay? The 3 failure points. The first one is that it's a lot easier to make money than to make CC. So that means everything, CC has a premium, all the animals become even more premium, and premium animals become, like unicorns. They don't exist anymore because it's too expensive. There is nothing you can buy them with you can buy them with cash, but nobody's selling them with cash because there's a premium on CC. So there's nothing much you can do with cash except to keep expanding your infrastructure, your zoo. But there's also no point doing that because you don't have animals to populate your zoo. And also because of this massive premium on CC, there's huge rapid inflation for animals, especially special animals or the endangered animals. And who has them? You just have the early players who didn't realize that CC is such a premium, and they just play the game as it's supposed to play. And they do have some of these special endangered animals, but they are the only lucky ones because it's so expensive. It's very expensive to sell them right now, or it's very expensive to price them, and nobody has the money to buy them, or nobody has the CC to buy them. The second thing is liquidity crisis. So the liquidity crisis sets in. There's a maximum, you have a mass production of offsprings. So we talked about the warthog, the ostrich, and the Indian peafowl. And people that's the only cheap thing to buy. Every zoo buys them, every zoo has them, every zoo is trying to mass produce them. And as you can imagine, now there's so many supply of them. There's huge supply for them, and the demand for them is a lot less than the supply because they produce really quickly. And you can imagine when the supply goes up and demand goes down, prices fall. When prices fall, that means you can get less CC because it's less competitive. Then you try to produce even more offsprings to try to earn more. But as you do that, then the prices fall even further because you're increasing the supply by so much, and then this is a liquidity trap. The other thing is also that all the animals for sale, because of that, all the animals for sale is the same thing. It's just these 3 animals, and if you're a new player in the game, you can only buy these 3 animals. You try to mass produce them, but the prices have dropped so far, and in the end you just have like 1 animal in your zoo, and you just focus on that animal, and you don't have cash, you don't get enough cash, you don't get enough reputation, you don't get enough CC. You're just not playing the game the way it's designed to, right? And imagine if you go to a zoo and the zoo has only one animal, let's say like a dog. So the entire zoo only has 1 dog. It's a Shih Tzu. And lastly, for the third failure design, is that because there are only these 3 species that exist, the value falls tremendously. And as I mentioned already, it's a bad cycle. So what happens with this bad cycle is also that the market equals the marketplace, right? When you go into the marketplace, the market just is dominated by these 3 animals. And the thing is, all these animals also have their own special traits. Some could be sick. Some, if you accidentally inbreed them, they could be weird. And some animals die very easily, so their price falls. And the market is now dominated with just these 3 species, and prices are just, weird prices, and everyone can only afford them. So these are the different design failures in a well-designed game, because it, people understand it some secondary impacts of this design. So up next, we're going to look at the effects as well as what are the different solutions that Planet Zoo can consider to redesign the game.